In this video, we're going to be breaking down the idea of choice in video games and examining two games that excel at implementing choice and the different ways in which they do this. The first game we're going to be looking at is Assassin's Creed Odyssey, released in 2018, which I've put about 200 hours into over the past 6 months, although I've still yet to finish the last DLC for the game. This game is going to serve as our example of choice in open world games and how it's implemented. We're going to be referring to this game as Odyssey for the sake of time from here on in the video. Our second game that we're looking at is less of a big name title, Deus Ex: Mankind Divided, released in 2016. Unlike the massive production size and scale of Odyssey, this game is a shorter, more linear experience, and it's going to serve as our example of choice in linear games that are contained to a specific environment. We'll be referring to this game as just Deus Ex from this point on. Worth noting, just in case, this video will have in-depth spoilers for multiple endings and major decisions for each of the games being discussed. Odyssey is the second Assassin's Creed game to release since the change of gameplay style from stealth-based to a more role-playing game sort of experience. While earlier games in the franchise had worlds that were comprised of a single large city or a few smaller cities with a more open area between locations, Odyssey is worth noting as not only does this game have what is by far the largest map in the franchise, but one of the largest maps in video games at 235 kilometers squared, roughly 3 times the size of Grand Theft Auto V's map and over 6 times the size of Skyrim's map. The story takes you all across ancient Greece, and whole regions of the map are not even necessary to the completion of the game. This is our first example of choice. While every region in the game has at least one mission that is central to the story of the game, there's no requirement to go explore or interact with these regions. You're fully allowed to just up and leave to go to your next mission at any time. In fact, the only region that requires you to complete most of the missions in order to progress is the opening region of Kefalonia, an island off the west coast of Greece that your character calls home, as the final mission of the first chapter gives you access to a boat from which your odyssey begins. This is one of the biggest examples of choice right here, as once you get your ship to sail around the Aegean Sea, there's nothing forcing you to go to the next story mission. In fact, due to the manner in which the leveling system works, you could go on to explore the entire map over the next 100 hours before even coming back to the start of the second chapter of the game. Right from the opening moment of the game, we're faced with a choice. We can either play as Cassandra or Alexios. Regardless of our choice, gameplay will not be largely affected, other than the gender of our character, as well as which of the two siblings is the elder sibling and hero of our story. Following the previously mentioned escape from the island of Kefalonia, the next story chapter takes us to the war-torn region of Megaris in central Greece in an attempt to track down your father, a Spartan general named Nikolaos, the Wolf of Sparta. Fighting alongside a young commander named Stentor, you find out Nikolaos is Stentor's adoptive father and mentor. After a battle against Athenian forces, your character is summoned to meet Nikolaos atop a cliff overlooking the battlefield, where you reveal your identity and you are given a choice: to kill your father for abandoning you at a young age, or to spare him. If you choose to spare your father, which was the choice I made, your father reflects on abandoning you and chooses to wander off into the world until he feels ready to face his misdeeds and come back to Sparta. Around the end of Chapter 7 of the game, Nikolaos will show up again, having been fighting as a lone wolf, ambushing Athenian soldiers while staying off the grid, with most of the military having believed he died. However, if you choose to kill your father, he's absent from the rest of the game. He's dead. There is no return of this major character. He's just dead. Seeing Nikolaos' body, Stentor will attack you and you'll be forced to kill him as well. Unlike some games which notify you when you're about to make an important decision or have just made a decision that alters the storyline, such as Life is Strange or Until Dawn, Odyssey gives no indication of the effects that your actions will have, or if your chosen action will even succeed. When I chose to spare Nikolaos, and during his return in Chapter 7 chose to spare Stentor, it allowed me to fluke my way into the best possible ending at the end of Chapter 10 of the game, in which you manage to reunite your family and live happily ever after. The happy ending came after roughly 150 hours of gameplay, as Chapters 6 through 8 are rather lengthy, and it's almost bone-chilling to think that an uneducated decision that comes after only about 10 hours of gameplay could have locked me out of one of the endings of the game dozens of hours on. This sort of decision is not a one-off occurrence either. Multiple points throughout the game allow you to spare or kill individuals that are of great importance to the plot, such as choosing to trust your brother/sister, Deimos, despite their brainwashing, or to kill them in an attempt to save your mother. The decision may have different outcomes or available dialogue options depending on previous encounters with Deimos, and can end in convincing Deimos to either come home, Deimos dying, or Deimos killing your mother and then dying. The choice of mercy or vengeance is a common recurring theme in Odyssey, and at the very end of the game, you have a chance to talk to the main villain, and if you choose not to kill her, she will admit that while her intentions were pure, it was that things spiraled out of control, and then she will abandon her place as the head of the Cult of Cosmos. A final mission where you don't need to kill anyone. This is the use of choice as a design element that allows Odyssey to work well though, as the variety of choices and their interactions immerse the player in the world, as they are the one crafting the story. Rather than a script with multiple dialogue options and slight variations such as Mass Effect or similar role-playing games, Odyssey gives the player the option to craft the script for themselves, and as a result, the thematic elements of the game are much more variable, following along with the choices made by the player, as well as the associated consequences. This is where the first of Odyssey's DLCs, Legacy of the First Blade, comes into play. This DLC takes an interesting spin on the choices of the game. While the actual plot is much more linear and has unavoidable story beats that can lead to the player feeling railroaded, these story elements focus heavily on the weight of actions throughout the main story. Legacy of the First Blade, as well as the second DLC, Fate of Atlantis, are both done as 3 episodes each, with each episode focusing heavily on a smaller group of characters in a self-contained story. Legacy of the First Blade's opening episode has what easily is one of the strongest villains of the entire franchise, the Huntsman. The Huntsman is notable in that he actually tries to avoid violence when possible, fighting you more with psychological warfare, as shown in a cryptic scene where he leads you to a large tree where he strung up the corpses of a couple dozen people, only to reveal to you that the corpses are those of soldiers that you killed who were just doing their jobs. Odyssey offers non-lethal methods to taking down enemies, whether it's using blunt-tipped arrows, fists instead of swords and spears, or knocking out enemies from behind instead of slitting their throats during stealth segments. While you're not forced into using lethal weaponry, lethal weapons do far more damage and make the game much easier. By forcing you to face the consequences of your actions, the Huntsman starts off an evolving story over the course of the DLC that demonstrates the value of mercy with the second villain, the Tempest, yet also demonstrates sometimes there really is no other choice than to kill, with the case of the main villain, Amorges. While the DLC is the weaker of the two, it sets up the idea of choice and its effects on those other than yourself, which the main story had previously avoided, such as how everyday citizens are affected by you and your comrades' actions. Sadly, this DLC suffers from an issue of having predetermined and unavoidable plot points, such as your character being in a romantic relationship and having a son. The only choice given regarding the relationship is if you want your character to be having a child as part of a loving family, or if you're only having a child to continue your bloodline. This was the point at which I felt that my choices had no impact, as I specifically tried to avoid my character having a romantic relationship with the love interest, only to be forced between 2 of the episodes to fall in love and start a family. The second DLC, however, Fate of Atlantis, absolutely excels at not only giving you a myriad of choices and outcomes, but also focusing on specific choices from the main storyline and the impact those choices have. While I've not quite finished the entire DLC yet, I've passed the 2 parts where choice from earlier in the game was extremely relevant. The DLC focused on your character's journey into the Hellenic underworld, first in the Elysian Fields, home to heroes and the righteous, and then on to Hades, the land named after the god of the underworld, where you see what happens to anyone with a neutral or evil life. The episode occurring in the Elysian Fields leads you to interact with gods and heroes such as Persephone, Hecate, Hermes, and Adonis, and depending on which, if any, of the 3 gods that you favor and follow the orders of, the outcome of the episode will vary wildly. While the ending of the episode is the same regardless of your choices, being thrown into the realm of Hades by Persephone and having to fight Cerberus, the variations on the ending quite literally number in the dozens. If you follow Persephone's orders to the letter, you can bring back one of the allies of yours that dies in the main story, with a minimum of 2 options, which we'll talk about later. Following Hecate's orders leads to her deceiving you and you being framed for her actions in the story, whereas going against Hecate leads to her banishment. Helping Hermes, as he requires, will lead to the only outcome where he is not your enemy. And lastly, having a relationship with Adonis will lead to him being cursed, while staying platonic will lead to him finally being allowed to leave Elysium. The first episode of the DLC originally faced a bit of criticism for having no variation in the major points, as you still get thrown to Hades, and Hermes still being betrayed by Persephone regardless of your actions. However, the second episode, set in the realm of the dead, forces you to deal with the initially inconsequential actions of your time in Elysium, as not destroying a certain item earlier in the DLC will lead to your adoptive little sister having no memory of you when you meet her in the afterlife. That is, if you meet her in the afterlife. Your adoptive little sister Phoebe is one of the options of characters you can bring back to life if you aid Persephone in every scenario. Your other option of character to bring back to life in episode 1 is your comrade Brasidas, who was killed by Deimos. If he is not returned to life, you will encounter him in Hades, where the god of the same name reveals that he didn't go to Elysium because he pillaged a village, during which he beat a pregnant woman until she miscarried. The end of his storyline in the afterlife sees you choose for him if he should stay in Hades and right his wrongs by taking care of the souls of dead children, or if he should go on to Elysium to live in eternal paradise. The good ending is the one in which he accepts his sins and forgoes paradise. That's the thing that makes choice in this DLC great though. It doesn't give you all of the information, nor does it tell you certain consequences of actions. Had you brought back Brasidas in episode 1, you never end up learning about his war crimes. And had you not let a suffering woman in episode 1 forget her sorrows with the waters of Lethe, you'd have your little sister recognize you. By limiting the knowledge of future and past given to the player, the game makes the choice of the player feel like it has weight to it. It would be like if you were given a script for a play on a line-by-line basis, not knowing what other characters' motivations or pasts were, nor how they would respond, and this leads to a sense of immersion, where your actions actually have weight to them. On the island of Kefalonia, where the game starts, there's a brief side mission where you're given the chance to interact with a priest who's attempting to burn a family they claim are impure and will lead to destruction and disease. Yet your adoptive sister Phoebe begs you not to let them, as the daughter is her friend. Our character is given the decision to endorse the burning of the family or stop the priest by force. As most individuals playing the game probably don't believe in gods such as Apollo or Asclepius that are responsible for plagues, we're initially inclined to stop the burning of the family. However, stopping the burning and freeing them will actually result in the plague spreading and decimating Kefalonia, which you'll only see if you choose to come back to the island, despite there not being any more story events taking place by the time the plague is spread. We're being given choices that have actual consequences that we can see for ourselves in the world, even if the game isn't pointing us at it and saying, look at the consequence of your choice. In a sense, there's two writers for your own specific journey through Odyssey. The creators of the video game, as they craft the rough idea and the key points, and yourself, as your initial reactions and choices regarding plot points can have lasting effects through the rest of the game, meaning that my 200 hours in Odyssey could have an entirely different story and outcome than your 200 hours in Odyssey. Moving on to Deus Ex, we see a game that succeeds in the same way when it comes to choice, but does so in an inverse manner. I've played the whole game through 4 times now, and I've personally managed to experience at least 2 variations of each questline and their endings. Deus Ex is not a big game. The main hub map is roughly 3 or 4 major intersections in futuristic Prague. For one of the runs where I tried playing the game as fast and violent as possible, I was actually able to beat the whole game in just one sitting. This doesn't hinder the game though, because every single building and NPC has at least some form of relation to a quest or activity, leading to the world feeling genuinely alive. There are 3 types of quests in this game. There are main story missions, which are required to finish the game and are highly linear. They don't offer a large amount of choice aside from the end of Chapter 2 and the final mission. There are side missions, which are not necessary but greatly increase the depth of the story and have many outcomes for each objective given for the quest line, not just the quest as a whole. Lastly, there are points of interest, unmarked quests with no specified goal. In POI quests, your only goal is to go to a place or person to experience part of the world. They have no bearing on the main events of the game. Choice is not just a strength of Deus Ex, it's a required part of gameplay. The end of the second act of the game sees your character, Adam Jensen, forced to choose between 2 missions, each of which is assigned to him by one of the factions that he supports. Adam can either break into a high-security bank vault to steal secrets on a shady corporation, or he can follow the orders of his boss to apprehend the bomb maker that's been terrorizing Prague. There's one caveat though. Progressing past the first objective for either of these missions will make Adam receive a call from the benefactor of the mission that he didn't do, chastising him for not picking their mission, with the game telling him the mission they didn't do has been failed. Not only does the choice make you choose between fighting a terrorist cell or doing a bank heist, it actually changes the details of the final mission. In the final mission of the game, a skyscraper has been rigged with explosives, while a second skyscraper that you're in has been taken over by armed terrorists with a switch for the explosives who also plan to poison a key politician. If you choose to go after the cell in Prague, you can talk to the bomb maker, Alison Stanek, into surrendering, where if you pick the right series of dialogue options, she will give you the jammer for the explosives. If you choose to go to the bank instead, the target vault contains an antidote to a bioweapon used by the terrorists, although there's no information on when or how to use it. Additionally, if you choose to finish 3 specific point of interest locations prior to the mission, you can unlock a bunch of additional equipment that is incredibly useful in the final chapter of the game, such as rare or custom weapons, upgrades for your cybernetic enhancements, and health and battery packs. This is where all the choices you've made start to become really important. The final mission is timed, but the game doesn't tell you that, and if you don't reach a certain point within 15 minutes, the bombs in the skyscraper go off and demolish the building, killing everyone inside. Unless you got the jammer. Because if you got the jammer, you have extra time to pull off those objectives. One of the objectives that you need to do is to stop a politician named Nathaniel Brown from drinking champagne poisoned with the bioweapon. If you don't reach the room where he is in time, also 15 minutes, he drinks the poison and dies. You're probably thinking about the previously mentioned antidote now. Well, the point where it forks between these two objectives, you find that your commanding officer has been poisoned as well, and you can save him if you have the antidote, as you don't need the antidote to save Brown, you can just reach the room in time. Lastly, when you reach the head terrorist who has the trigger for the bombs, it will trigger a very tough boss fight. Except, if you happen to invest in X-ray vision earlier in the game, you can find a device called Damocles' Sword, which instantly kills the leader by detonating an explosive in his brain. You don't actually need to kill him though, because almost every situation that leads to combat in this game starts with dialogue, where you can talk enemies down or lie to them about your identity or intentions. All unskippable fights also have non-lethal options, such as tasers or gas, so that you can go for the pacifist achievement where you finish the whole game without killing anyone or causing a single death. So for every one of the variables that you've had to choose from in this mission, it creates a variation of the ending that's also available. Brown dies, Brown lives, Brown is saved by the antidote. Your CO dies, your CO is saved by the antidote. The bombs go off, the bombs get jammed, the bombs are saved from detonation by reaching the switch in time. The main villain dies by the bomb in his head, main villain is shot, main villain is taken down non-lethally. And this is just for 2 of the missions in the game. There's 15 you have to play, 15 side missions you don't have to play, and 9 point of interest locations. Well, that's the climax of the game though. So what about smaller points in the narrative where it's not necessary for the ending of the game? We're going to dive into the quest line revolving around a street drug called Neon, as it has one of the more variable narrative paths. The quest starts after receiving a tip about a drug dealer in the neighborhood near your apartment. If you go into their alleyway where they deal, you'll have to incapacitate the dealers as they won't sell to you since you're part robot. In their alleyway hideout, you find a note about a large-scale buyer with his address, your next location. Alternatively, you could track the dealer down to her apartment and hack her computer to get the information without any direct conflict. Regardless of how you choose to get the information, you'll end up heading to Unit 202 of 33 Hlavny apartments, where the buyer is located. The apartment's locked and has security shutters, so you're not met with a myriad of choices on how to get in. If you invested in remote hacking, you could raise the shutters and climb in a window. If you have a shotgun, you can blow the lock off the door, or if you have a multi-tool or a decent hacking skill, you could brute force the mechanical lock. Once inside the apartment, you find it empty, but with references to a suspicious cleaning service presenting you with 2 new options. Call the cleaning service and wait for them to do their job, after which you find a keycard to an illicit rave where the drug is being distributed, or you could head to the cleaning agency's office. You find out they're distributors of the drug, which will give you the address of the rave. If you got the keycard, you can simply walk into the underground rave, or if you only got the location, you can break your way in by blowing the front door off the hinges or by sneaking through access tunnels underground. Either way, you find out the reason the drug is dangerous is because it causes aneurysms in anyone taking a separate medication that roughly half the population needs to take in this alternate future. Additionally, you find out the Georgian mafia, who show up in a few quest lines, have been the ones manufacturing at an underground lab in the sewers with the help of a pharmachem specialist. Upon going to the lab, you can either hack and sneak your way in, or go in guns blazing. Now, Guns blazing will likely lead to most of the lab catching fire and being destroyed, but sneaking in gives you an additional option. If you find the specialist in her office, you can enter a dialogue with her that can end in her agreeing to help shut down the operation by sabotaging the equipment, or her attempting to alert the guards. Even if she tries to alert the guards, you'll have a split second available where you can try to disable the alarm panel or incapacitate her. Now, I've done this questline 3 entirely different ways over the course of my 3 playthroughs that I did this mission, and it's a phenomenal example of how Deus Ex allows loads of different outcomes for what's a fairly linear quest that comes back to a lot of the same story beats. Do you have to go to certain locations to do certain things as determined by the script? Well, yes. Do you have full control over the manner in which the objectives get accomplished? Also yes. You could go through the entire quest with nobody except for the pharmachem specialist even knowing you were involved. Or you could go door to door killing drug dealers until nobody's left to even sell the drug. The choice is fully up to you, and this is how the game excels at choice. It doesn't give you a ton of variety in the endings, but you're basically RoboCop and the drugs need to stop because they're dangerous. Everything aside from that endpoint is left in the hands of the player. It can be a stealth game, it can be a shooter, it can be a tech-based hacking game, a dialogue-based adventure game. That is your choice. At the end of the game, the final cutscene has you sit down in a chair and watch the news while sipping on a glass of whiskey. Unless you chose to drink that whiskey during a button prompt in the first mission, in which case he goes to pour it before realizing the bottle is empty. The outcomes based on your decisions will then show how your choices impacted the people of Prague. The choices don't all need to be of great consequence. In fact, sometimes the visible response of the world to your choices has nothing to do with any sort of mission. During my first playthrough, I went with a hacking-based ability set, and while exploring Prague, I hacked security on a storage locker attached to a tech business to scavenge some spare parts. Upon coming back to the shop later in the game, I found the owner had installed cameras in the storage locker and had hired an armed guard for the storefront. In my playthroughs where I didn't go into that storage locker, the owner never upgraded the security, as my actions had not given him need to. The smaller scale world of Deus Ex means that more thought can be put into the characters in areas like this, where choices can actually have a visible impact, often in real time, due to the fact that there isn't much of a world to account for outside of the 4 blocks of Prague where most of the game is set. So looking back on Odyssey and Deus Ex, what can we see about choice and the interactivity of the script for a video game? How do these games manage to pull it off? Well, both games have branching dialogue. This is a must when it comes to a game where choice is given in a manner that makes the choices taken feel valuable. You can't have a proper script without dialogue, and you can't have proper choice if the dialogue is not included. Do these games have a set story? Well, yes and no. Both games have set story beats that are unavoidable, such as Pericles, Brasidas, and Phoebe's deaths in Odyssey, as well as the stealing of Atlantis, while Deus Ex has missions with a set start and end point. Despite this though, Odyssey and Deus Ex give an immense amount of choice for the finer details of the plot, as well as how you go achieving those goals. While this means the overarching plot of the game can't be modified to too great of an extent, it gives the player the ability to choose how and occasionally the why of the script. With Odyssey, we saw this in the ability to kill off your father in the second chapter, changing a substantial portion of the game, but not changing it so greatly as to affect the ending or other main story points, only the portion of the story that involves your family. Both games allow a substantial amount of choice in how you accomplish your goals. You can go about your missions quietly or weapons blazing, lethal or non-lethal. While neither game lets you create a custom character, both games allow a substantial amount of choice in how you build up the powers of the main character. In Odyssey, there's 3 branches of gameplay to pursue: Hunter, Warrior, and Assassin, each favoring different abilities and weapons, not to mention that there's dozens, if not hundreds, of different weapons and armor options. Deus Ex allows you to upgrade and unlock new tech built into your body as you play. Experimental technology that is game-changing in terms of its power, such as homing stun missiles or nanotech armor, can be unlocked, but in order to access it, you must permanently remove a different ability from your character to balance out the toll it takes on the system. Yet another example of choice and risk versus reward. I personally disabled the ability to shoot grenades around me in a 360-degree arc as it did not suit my playstyle, in exchange for the ability to hack things remotely with my mind. But there is another option available with choosing to disarm yourself of those powers, not disabling these powers at all. While you get more powers, over time your heads-up display will start to glitch or to display incorrect information to you as you lose control due to the system strain. Just another example of choice where there is an element of risk and reward. Overall, we see two games that excel with choice, making you feel the weight of your actions and making the script of the games evolve alongside you. Both of these games are on sale right now dirt cheap as part of PS4 Sony Spring Sale, so if you haven't had a chance to play them and you actually want to feel like your actions have consequences in the games you play, well, there's no time like the present. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.